I've approached this, folks, is I guess I'm one of these people that I recognize that we're all in kind of different places in our career and our perspectives and where we situate ourselves in schools and otherwise. And so I look at it like, for me, I always need to have the full picture if I'm going to appreciate any of the details. And there's other folks that just want the details. So I've got sort of 20 to 25 minutes where I'm going to try and give you a lot. I'm going to brush through some of it fairly quickly because you can always go back, but hopefully certain pieces will work for you for where you're at in some capacity. And if not, that's the way it goes. So what I'm going to talk to you about really is it is a North Vancouver story, but I think it's bigger than that. It's sort of a shifting landscape in regards to how people understand how we truly build capacity in our schools, and how we sort of been moving through different movements and how we've done that work here in North Vancouver to try and build that sense of capacity in our work. So, I always think about our stuff is public schooling is so complex, right? We have different unions, professional autonomy, different belief systems that exist in our community. And certainly depending on the level of parent politics at a school, we either have an underinvestment or an overinvestment. Either one can be problematic. Now I say that because I think that our greatest resource in public schooling oftentimes is this ability to focus our work. And it's often the most challenging thing. So I have a question that I've kept, I guess, a few years for me, and it's sort of a premise behind a lot of this work, is that when you have a finite amount of resources, and I challenge you to think about this for yourselves and your environments, when you have a finite amount of resources, how do you best align your work, right, in a coherent manner that actually builds that capacity at a classroom or a school level? And that's a brutally difficult question to answer. So in North Vancouver, we've really been developing and using this notion of school planning as a vehicle, right, to enable that level of focus at a school, district, and onwards. So what I'm going to try and do, I'm going to give you a couple of position the work in North Vancouver so you have a sense of where it's flowing from, big picture-wise. Then take you on a brief sort of tour of the history and touch a bit of research because some of you might want that if it's helpful. Won't spend a lot of time on it. And then get into sort of that process piece of at a school district to a school level. And I'll probably show you an online repository that we have as well, because it has very much practical tools that if you buy into or align with some of the thinking around this, you can access. So 3 words I want you to keep in mind, if you can, is this notion of intentionality, right? How are we going about this? It's not a free-for-all. It's an intentional work. The other word is appreciative. So how do we go about it in a building people up kind of manner and taking advantage of the great things that we have? But also the word scalable. The things I'm talking about, I think, can be large system, school, and arguably at a classroom level because, a learning community is a learning community. So I'm going to jump off. Let's see if this PowerPoint here works. Okay, great. So foundation, big picture in mind. This is a visual that we've used, starting to use a visual metaphor, I guess, in North Vancouver. It kind of stems from Margaret Wheatley's work in organizational health, but it's a notion that we are an organism to some degree and that we actually want, from executive on through, our entire organization to be healthy. In other words, we want a healthy teachers union. We want a healthy QP union. We want a healthy DPAC, Healthy Principals Association, because the stronger each of those units are, the better off we are for our kids. And we believe that, even though challenging it can be sometimes, that's the vision, right? So if that's true, right, we also want to keep it simple, right? So we want to boil it down. That's a big, big picture, the big tree. But this whole notion that when we think about what the work that we get to do, right, it is, if this was your child, right, how would you want them to be treated? And of course, the old Deweyism, right? For children, school is not simply the preparation for life, it is life. So in positioning our work, right, as you can see, big picture, how are we functioning as an organization and what does that look like? And from an intertwined and appreciative way to making it very simple, folks. This is about children, right? And how do we, create those environments and make it, the best learning and engagement possible for our children, right, as a whole. So that's really positioning. So how do these things find themselves coming together, right? they find expression through, this is an approach we've taken when we talk about school planning, is that we've pulled it back because we believe it's in many ways partly a cultural exercise, right? In that this has been our message. So this is actually a picture of kids at Dorothy Linus, one of our schools. One of my principals sent this to me after an exercise they've been doing around school planning, and I said, thank you very much. I'm going to use this one. And we've challenged people to even just have these conversations. So what makes a great school? What makes your school great? Right? So we start from that place of appreciation. This link on the bottom, what makes a great school? I'm going to probably take you there later, but if you it's just one of our own sort of makeshift ones, but it has some really good resources that our educators have put together to help the actual detailed process of this work. But I just want you to get a sense of it starts from this perspective. So vision on down to a vision at our school. And it really stems from, I know many of you have seen this notion, but I've come to appreciate it a lot more in that if you really build a learning culture, it is amazing how, not seamless, but certainly the energy going into teaching and learning can shift so easily. So really at the heart of thinking about school development and the planning process, it is about moving from that old notion where it's simply a strategy, where growth planning used to sit, like school growth planning, to now more of a cultural exercise. How do we build that sense of coming together? So that's a backdrop, right? So I always go, a quote that I always have in my mind is, if that's true, right? So if the things I'm talking about are true, those three big ideas, how do we act? How do we go forward, right? But I have to pause a little bit and talk about, so why, right? Why would these things be important? And for me, there's a couple of ideas that seem to come together as to why would I want to engage in this kind of a process. And it really has to do with this notion of, in some respects, diversity, but diversity of our students and diversity of our educators, and that being our teachers, our EAs, as certainly principals, vice principals, and everyone in our system. Where are we? So I'm just going to take you through a quick little perspective on that. So I often think of this notion of theory of mind, right? Like, this is me. And when I first started teaching, of course, I thought that, oh, well, I was taught in a certain way, so everybody thinks this way. Now, I would kind of contend is once I came out of a classroom, I used to think when you're first in any kind of an itinerant or a supervisory role, I'm not sure if I'm alone in this experience. I know others have had it. Like, you come out and you think everybody comes to work trying to hit a home run like you. And then you realize, oh, that's not actually the case. Like, there's this huge variety. So I kind of parallel the experience of a teacher in the novice stage to, again, someone in a leadership capacity at a novice stage, is that what we have to get to is an appreciation of, this is what a classroom actually looks like, right? And some of you may have seen these slides before if you've seen me speak. But this is also what a staff room looks like, depending on the size of your staff, right? You've got all the characters in the world. So the wondrous diversity exists not only at a classroom level, but at a school level. So if we're trying to focus to a particular place or end, this can be really a challenge. This is why I go back to, it really is about a cultural exercise. And I think the research is really starting to point in that direction as well. So when I think about that, I've used this slide, and much to this next slide, people always laugh when they see the tools. They don't want me to use it anymore. But for me, I try to take that complexity and try to at least compartmentalize it in a way that I make understanding, right? So if that diversity exists at a classroom level, at a teacher level, et cetera, at a principal level, I have to gain appreciation that in any given group, we're going to have people. If you orient yourself to this slide to the right, so you see all of the tools are lined up horizontally, and you have like the hammer saw, everything, and there's some sophisticated tools there. We have people in our group, right? Teachers in our class, in our schools, that are rock stars. They have every tool under the belt, and they can make the finest kinds of things working with their students. Same with our students in our classes. But then we have teachers that are awesome, but they may be missing one particular tool, like classroom management, and on down the list, right? So we use this to think that every school you walk into, right, is exactly the same in many ways. You're going to have rock stars, you're going to have people that struggle, and you're going to have that level of diversity. So the question is, so what do we do, given that that's the reality of our organization, be that a school or otherwise? How do we now take an authentic look at that together, honor our strengths, while yet develop a focus that can enhance the practice of educators? Now, I'm building sort of a logic argument here, right? So for me, and I think there's some others that would contend this as well, is when we think about education, the role of the professional educator, it's very, when we talk about professional autonomy, it's, to me, it's really clear in that you have professionalism and professional autonomy around your ability to design curriculum, instruct, differentiate instruction, assessment, so formative, summative, right, et cetera, like having that skill set, and of course, managing that learning environment and promoting social emotional learning. These are the pillars of educational practice. So if we talk about, that wondrous diversity and keep moving it in, and let's talk about it from a staff level, these wondrous differences that we have, at the end of the day, we want all of our people to be as expert as possible in the interdependent nature of these four things: curriculum, instruction, assessment, and social emotional learning. So to me, that's the ends in mind, right? So when we engage in this work, if we actually truly want to enhance learning and engagement for students, the only way, right, the only way that's going to happen is by empowering and enabling and development of our educators. It's to me, that's a given. And so that changes the landscape. If we start talking about teaching and learning, now instead of just tracking what under growth planning was around literacy or writing or whatever, that's, to me, there's some problems with just looking at that, right? Because if it is the capacity of our educators to design environments and be able to deliver on these things, then that's where we need to be focusing. So I give you that backdrop because I think that that's a lens, hopefully, that can shape a little bit of the way we look at this notion of accountability, or better yet, enhancing student learning. That's really that piece. So sorry, go back here. So now that sort of backdrop, that's the North Vancouver sort of story piece of the big picture. And I'm going to go give you some quick history. Some of you, of course, know this history. Some of you may not. It's always a good thing to know where you've come from, to have a sense of where you're going. This is this very brief history of what, I guess, some notion of proving you're a good school has been in BC for a while. Pre-2001 accreditation. Some of you experienced that. A lot of paperwork to prove something. We're not sure. 2001, 2015, accountability framework, so school growth plans. Again, it was a process where we really didn't have any teachers involved, so that's a problem considering the end result is classroom work. I know a lot of administrators wrote it off the side of their desk, and that's frustrating. Then, of course, from 2016 on, I guess, this whole notion of enhancing student learning, and I think people's embracing of this process of appreciative inquiry as a legitimate way to build a sense of going forward and focus. Now, again, you had representatives. This is part of a big process. The only reason why I show this is because a lot of different groups came to the table and said, yeah, that's the way we want to go. And that makes sense. So that's that. A couple of pieces of research. Again, I'm not going to spend time on this, but just to validate the perspective, you can go online and pull these off, Changing Schools from the Inside Out. You're seeing a lot. I'm seeing a lot more meta-analysis and research. McCrell is one place, which looks at why and how this is so important, and even policy in the United States is starting to shift. And then I go to the nature of learning, right? OECD. So if these appreciative inquiry, zone of proximal learning, participatory learning, all of these things, if these things are at the heart of the nature of learning, and we want to enhance student learning and engagement, well, wouldn't this be inherent in the process that we use to look at our strengths and look at the areas where we need to focus? And then, of course, oldie, but we always go to, this is Fullen stuff. Again, some different words, but the same idea, right? A good resource for that is to look at Cultures Built to Last, Systemic Works, PLCs at Work. Rick DeFore and Fullen sort of did a handbook together that sort of speaks to some of this stuff. That's just the research that you have. But what it really all comes down to, in a nutshell, is this whole notion that the how is as important as the what, right? Before we had the plan. And really what this is shifting to is this recognition that the process is as important as the product. And I think it perfectly fits with where we are in schooling, right? I mean, if you think about the new curriculum and whatnot, or you think about where we're at with the volume of information that's there for children, it is now more about the learning process and the intentionality of that learning process than it is about that final product. Although, products are important as well. They represent learning. However, that process is so significant. So we start leaning into the process. This is a visual my colleagues have. I love it because I'm sure some of you have staff like this where you've got a couple of people rowing. They just happen to be rowing in the opposite directions, and you got some other people who are really happy. They're kind of just sitting in the middle, going, "Yeah, no, I'm good." And so the goal of the process is, of course, to engage more people. Some to pick up some oars, and some to just shift a little bit in their seat. And while we honor that diversity that we have at our school level, again, that's that notion that you can't separate. And this, I think, was a challenge of our previous model, right? If you're thinking about school development, I don't know how you could ever do that and separate it from the actual school. Like from my chair as an assistant superintendent, I can't dictate change from this seat. The change is going to happen with the people in the building and them working together, right? It's not an external, and that was a flaw with, I think, our previous accountability model. There was that pressure from afar as opposed to intentionality of the process. And I look at it like you don't get a pass on engaging in the process, right? But you can't be blamed for the complexity of your environment. You have to work with that. Your people have to be a part of it. Now, I say that because when we have found in the process is that, and considering this is BC principals and vice principals, it puts a whole different lens on this notion of leadership, doesn't it? I mean, some of you are naturally designed this way, and others of us are not. And so what it says is for some of us, if this is true, we probably have to look at, depending, what are those skills, right? We may have the disposition for it, but we may not have the skills developed in our leadership style to be able to deliver on this, and it can be highly threatening. So, depending on, where you've been, you may have a different place in this. I kind of always think of balance, right? That there's a place for leadership, but there's also a place for developing team. So this is just a perspective on the shifting landscape of leadership. So we'll go back to this notion that it is a process. It's not an event. And that's hard, right? It shouldn't be something that you dust off once a year, put in a couple of new periods, and send off. If it's so important that we are building the capacity of our educators, and focus is our greatest strength, then this should be a part of that. I wouldn't say day to day, but it should always be prevalent in regards to what we're doing. And that's sort of what I want to impress upon you to agree. So if it's a process, I'm going to show you now North Vancouver, right? So we had, we were conscious of this, and this, I hope, can breathe some, give a pause for folks. We look at it like, this is a long process, right? It takes time for people to move out of what was an old or lacking planning model or school growth model to a different way of doing work. So we looked at the significant transition period. So a lot of last year was spent in building awareness of what we were trying to do and the thinking behind it, and then engaging our people in the process to develop their plan. In other words, how are they going to strategically do this at their school? And that's not easy. And we also recognize as a school district that, we're going to have some schools that are going to be way out front because of the nature of their school, less, more culturally speaking, they're in a better place, right? To highly complex places that are still struggling in moving forward in a coherent way. And now our work would be to come alongside and support them. Up into a place now where people are at a place, many, that they are feeling confident and they're getting their plan working to what they see, to a really 1 to 3 year process and cycle, not an annual cycle, but a much longer period of time. And as we all know, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years to really change a complex environment. And we've actually started thinking about principal transfer in relationship to where are they in regards to the development of their great school, right? So really giving that time to have an authentic, sort of appreciative analysis of what's making your school great, while at the same time, what are some areas that if we want to enhance what we're doing that we need to focus on, okay? So we come back to this from time to time because it just breathes a little bit of, okay, right. It doesn't have to be done tomorrow. And I think gives you, further on, if I show you some of the school stuff, you'll get that. Okay, so guiding questions. This is where we sort of dug into some of this stuff. You're welcome to use it. I'm going to go through this stuff real quick because you're going to see some of this further. And then who was part of that conversation? You know, you can pull this out, think of it scalable for your level. Okay. As we went through that process, here were the words that come up. I have no doubt they'll come up for you. Right? The same kinds of big things come up. But again, if those things are true, we took those and deconstructed them down to some key sayings, right? So this is the ends in mind. So for us, we're use this as a tool to assess how we're doing, right? So a focus on student engagement learning. So what is the focus on student engagement learning at a particular school? What is the culture of teamwork and collaboration, et cetera, et cetera? So this becomes sort of an ends in mind kind of tool where we can, I'll skip past this to this next one here, sorry. And now this isn't for us to judge a school, it's for them to have their own conversation, right? So where are we? Are we a 5? Are we a 7? And what does that look like? And where should we, if not, where should we be going? So it's a way to do their own gap analysis in this process and determine an area for focus, knowing that, you know, it's probably one area, maybe 2, but certainly not all. And then the assessment that comes alongside, for example, rubrics around school-based resource team, etc. Process, not an event, just positioning. And now I'm going to take you into here because I think this is probably, I'm just conscious of time. This is a web repository that was developed by our people. Well, it's in development, and we've had a number of people come alongside, from vice principals to teachers, etc., to give support to it. And it's a place where practical tools exist, right, in regards to the process, who should be on your team, right, who to consider on your team, their anticipated input, right, etc. And here you've got some activities and, of course, some tools or videos that align with the thinking behind this. So that's just sort of an overview. And then you get into vision and goal setting. Again, same kind of practical kinds of things that people can use. So if I were to type into this piece, for example, there's a school planning workbook. Now, again, what we've said to our people, hey, use it if it works for you, don't if it doesn't. Some people really wanted some kind of concrete workbook to work through, and so we made that available, and others, you know, not so much, right? So that can be there for you. And then if we go into these different kinds of things that people can use, same with strategies and tools. Oh, sorry, let's go into this one here. Again, facilitation resources. Now, this isn't fully complete. As you can see, we are in the vision and goal setting and the planning process stage. Then we'll move to monitor, evaluate, and adapt, and then communicating the progress. So I just share that with you. So if you want to go in and play around, you can. And let me go back to this slide thing. So that's big. I probably brushed through some of that too quickly. I get it. But you can always go back or ask for more input. This is a real school, Seymour Heights. We have a few schools like this. And the only reason I include this is not to spend a lot of time on it, because you in your school will do your own thing. If you understand the why and you understand the process piece, and you allow yourself to be vulnerable and work with people on this, you'll connect the dots and you'll have people that can support you. But as this process, I'm sure we'll have this PowerPoint available to folks, this is their work, not mine. So they sent me this PowerPoint of their work. They talk about their foundation. They talk about their activity of their schools. They did this with their staff. And they also have a timeline in here. So you can get a flavor of, in real life, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? Depending on where your staff is, it is a process if you want people to move forward. So you can see even in this, they started in 2014 and under certain work. And you can take they've marked it down sort of what were the highlights of each month. So this is the intentionality piece. I look at it like you don't get a pass on doing it, but you get time. So as a school, what is your process and how are you committing to it? And you can, see sort of where they were developing in this up to the next pieces, and you see now how school-based Pro-D, and what was interesting, of course, is they'll say how it fundamentally changes the feeling in their school and the commitment, shared commitment about how they utilize professional development, et cetera, right? Which, of course, I know can be a breath of fresh air. And then the area that they identified for growth, their drafting of their goals, their planning team. This is the messy work. This is, right? People send me these things, but it's great. And then ultimately, where they land. Then this is another school who did an annual report. Not that we ask people to do an annual report, but this whole notion of how do you celebrate where you've been? And they've actually found it to be remarkably helpful because their community, it sort of puts a positive conversation in the community, and it really gives them a platform for going forward. So I've just included some ending slides about situating things that you can use or not use. You don't need any of that stuff. I just kept it in there because you never know. Somebody might go, hey, I like that. I might use it. So that's, in a big nutshell, I've taken you hopefully from pillar to post and given you an avenue into. So here are some resources and tools. And if you're serious about, looking at the kind of work that's involved, hopefully there can be some community support to engage in that work.